In the valley of Elah, two nations stood at the edge of destiny. For 40 days, the armies of Israel and Philistia had faced each other in deadly stalemate. But this was no ordinary standoff. The Philistines possessed a weapon that had never known defeat, a giant whose very presence could turn the tide of war before a single sword was drawn. The Philistines had mastered iron when Israel still fought with bronze. They had professional armies when Israel relied on farmers with swords. But their greatest advantage walked among them on legs like tree trunks, carrying weapons that could cleave normal men in two. Goliath of Gath, 9 feet and 9 inches of Philistine fury. His bronze armor alone weighed 125 pounds. His spear point was 15 pounds of iron death. For 40 years, he had been the ultimate weapon of war, a living fortress that no enemy had ever breached. Look into the face of Goliath and see 40 years of victory. Every scar tells a story of triumph. Every line speaks of warriors who had fallen before his spear. He was more than a soldier. He was the living symbol of Philistine supremacy, the answer to every military problem. Across the valley, the army of Israel waited in growing desperation. These were not professional soldiers, but farmers who had left their plows, shepherds who had abandoned their flocks. Their courage was unquestioned, but courage alone would not be enough against the terror that had paralyzed them for 40 days. Every morning, Goliath would emerge from the Philistine camp to issue his challenge. The same words, the same impossible demand. Choose a champion. Fight in single combat. Winner takes all. For 40 days, no Israelite had been brave enough or foolish enough to answer. Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he kills me, we'll be your servants. But when I kill him, you'll serve us. The response was always the same. Across the Israelite line, veterans who had faced lions and bears without flinching stepped backward before this giant. It was not cowardice. It was mathematics. No human warrior could stand against this mountain of bronze and fury. King Saul felt the weight of impossible leadership. Once anointed by God, now aware of divine rejection, he faced the greatest crisis of his reign without heaven's favor. His army grew more demoralized with each passing day, while the Philistines grew more confident. 8 miles from this valley of fear, in the quiet town of Bethlehem, the future king of Israel was doing what he had done since childhood, watching his father's sheep. David had no idea that today his simple errand would change the course of history. David was the youngest son of Jesse, overlooked when the prophet Samuel came to anoint Israel's future king. But God hadn't forgotten this red-haired shepherd, whose heart beat in perfect rhythm with heaven's plans. While armies trembled before a giant, the Lord was preparing his chosen instrument. Jesse had sent 3 sons to war with Saul. For weeks, he'd had no word of their fate. The decision to send David to the battlefield was not made lightly, but a father's heart knows no peace when his children are in danger. Take this bread and grain to your brothers. See how they are, and bring back word. As David walked toward the valley of Elah, he carried more than food for his brothers. Unknown to him, he carried God's solution to Israel's crisis. The shepherd's staff in his hand and the sling at his side, tools for protecting sheep, would soon serve a far greater purpose. The military camp was unlike anything in David's experience. Thousands of tents, weapons being sharpened, the organized chaos of an army living with fear. To David's shepherd eyes, these warriors looked like sheep without a shepherd, scattered and afraid. When David found his brothers, the change in them was immediately apparent. Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah had left Bethlehem as confident young men. Now they bore the expression of soldiers who had lived with daily humiliation and the prospect of inevitable defeat. As David distributed food from home, the familiar morning ritual began around him. For 40 days, this had been repeated. Battle lines formed, weapons ready, and then the giant's challenge that sent everyone retreating in shame. Then David saw why the Israelite army gathered each morning without fighting. From the Philistine camp emerged a figure so enormous, so utterly intimidating, that his very presence explained everything. This was not a man, but a living mountain of war. For David, watching this daily ritual of humiliation was incomprehensible. These were brave men. He could see it in their faces. But they were retreating, not from an army, but from one giant. More shocking still, this giant was mocking not just Israel's army, but Israel's God. I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight. Something ignited in David's heart that had nothing to do with military strategy and everything to do with spiritual conviction. This uncircumcised Philistine was not just challenging soldiers. He was defying the God who had parted the Red Sea and brought down the walls of Jericho. David, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David's question cut through 40 days of fear like lightning through darkness. Suddenly, soldiers who had accepted defeat began to see their situation differently. Perhaps size wasn't everything. Perhaps the God of Israel was indeed greater than the gods of the Philistines. Eliab's reaction was immediate and furious. As the eldest brother, he felt responsible for David's safety and mortified by his words. How dare this boy, who knew nothing of war, nothing of giants, reduce their impossible situation to a simple question of faith? Eliab, why have you come here? I know your conceit and wickedness. You came only to watch the battle. Word of the young shepherd's questions reached King Saul with surprising speed. In an army where hope had become extinct, any voice suggesting that Goliath might be defeatable commanded immediate royal attention. Saul, desperate for any solution, demanded to see this boy. The contrast could not have been greater. King Saul, nearly 7 feet of regal presence, surrounded by the symbols of royal power. David, barely 17 in simple shepherd's clothing, yet carrying himself with a confidence that commanded attention. Saul, you cannot fight this Philistine. You're only a boy, and he's been a warrior from his youth. David's response revealed a resume of courage that no one in the royal court could have imagined. While they saw a shepherd boy, God saw a warrior who had been trained in the wilderness, tested by predators, and proven victorious in battles they knew nothing about. David, when a lion or bear carried off a sheep, I went after it and struck it down. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and bear will rescue me from this Philistine." In that moment, King Saul faced the most desperate decision of his reign. Everything in his military experience screamed that this was madness, but everything in his spiritual memory whispered that God specialized in impossible victories. "Saul, go, and the Lord be with you." Saul's offer of his personal armor was both practical and symbolic. If the boy was going to face death, he needed the best protection available. The armor had served Saul through years of warfare. Perhaps it would protect this unlikely champion. But David's rejection of the royal armor was profound in its implications. He would not try to become something he was not. He would not fight Goliath on the giant's terms. Instead, he would trust in the skills God had given him and the tools he knew how to use. "David, I cannot go in these because I am not used to them." Standing in his shepherd's clothing, David looked utterly inadequate for the task ahead. No bronze to turn sword blows, no helmet to guard his head. He would face the world's most feared warrior, dressed like a boy tending sheep. But David knew that battles are won by God, not by armor. As David walked toward the brook that separated the armies, he became the focal point for 20,000 watching warriors. The Philistines watched with amusement. Surely Israel was not serious about sending a boy. The Israelites watched with desperate hope. Perhaps God would work a miracle. David's selection of stones was conducted with the precision of a master craftsman. These were not random pebbles, but carefully chosen ammunition. 5 smooth stones, worn perfect by centuries of water flow, prepared by providence for this moment of destiny. 5 stones, 5 chances. But David knew he would need only one. The same God who had prepared these stones in the brook had prepared David's heart for this moment. Faith and physics would combine in perfect harmony. Before descending into the valley, David paused in prayer. Not the desperate prayer of a frightened boy, but the confident communion of a faithful servant reporting for duty. The peace that settled over his features proclaimed a truth the watching armies would soon discover. David's descent into the valley of Elah was like a shepherd walking toward his flock. No hesitation, no fear. Each step carried him closer to a confrontation that would echo through history. The boy was walking toward the giant, but destiny was walking toward both of them. When Goliath saw his opponent, his initial satisfaction at finally having someone accept his challenge transformed into something approaching insult. For 40 years, he had been the terror of battlefields. Now Israel was mocking him by sending a child. The sight of David and Goliath in the same frame defied belief. The giant towered nearly 10 feet, his armor gleaming like bronze lightning. David appeared barely half his height, carrying nothing but a staff and shepherd's sling. It looked like an execution, not a battle. David's response would ring through history as one of faith's greatest declarations. He spoke not with human bravado, but with divine certainty. This was not a boy challenging a giant. This was God's anointed proclaiming heaven's verdict. "David, you come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands." When giant and shepherd charged toward each other across the valley floor, time seemed suspended. Goliath's momentum was like an avalanche. His spear aimed at David's heart. But David's countercharge defied every instinct of self-preservation. In sling warfare, courage was accuracy. David's hands moved with the precision of countless repetitions. Stone to sling, arm in motion, building momentum. This was the moment when training met destiny, when faith met physics, when the impossible prepared to become inevitable. The release came at the perfect moment, when distance, speed, and divine timing aligned. The stone flew not just with human accuracy, but with heaven's purpose. In that fragment of time, the fate of nations hung in the balance. The impact was both violent and final. The carefully chosen stone, launched with perfect precision, found the one vulnerable spot in the giant's armor. Physics and faith combined as Goliath's own momentum became the instrument of his destruction. The fall of Goliath shook more than the ground. It shook the confidence of the Philistine army and the fear of Israel. The giant who had terrorized thousands lay still in the dust, defeated not by superior force, but by superior faith. David's use of Goliath's own sword to complete the victory fulfilled his prophecy with perfect precision. The head that had spoken blasphemy would speak no more. The champion of the Philistines had become proof of Israel's God's supremacy. The death of their champion shattered the Philistine army's will to fight. Warriors who had marched to certain victory now fled in panic. The Israelites, transformed by witnessing the impossible, charged after their enemies with courage born of divine demonstration. As David held the proof of his victory, his expression showed not human pride, but divine gratitude. He had been the instrument, but God had been the psaur. The shepherd boy understood what many warriors never learn, that victory belongs to the Lord. In the valley of Elah, the impossible became inevitable. A shepherd boy with a sling defeated a giant with a spear. But more than that, faith conquered fear, trust triumphed over terror, and the God of Israel demonstrated that no giant is too tall, no enemy too strong, no challenge too great for those who fight in his name.